who wind up saying, okay, you say I can't do this, you say I can't do that, my grades are bad, well, I'll settle for something less than I am dreaming of.
That kills me. I mean, just hearing that breaks my heart, because there's so many conditions and things we could be doing in schools to make sure that doesn't happen.
And you write about the problems of these labels: gifted, challenged, disabled, and so on. Those words are so nebulous.
They are, and we live in a culture in which those labels are meaningful, in that they allow people who have real needs get the resources they require.
On the other hand, wouldn't you want to put kids who have certain abilities together?
Let's put it this way: people with particular kinds of minds together, yes. But that's reframing the issue. You're saying different abilities. I'm saying these are just different kinds of minds.
Well, it has been learned that when teachers look at a person's record, they immediately have either higher or lower expectations of them.
That's absolutely correct. And also there are these self-fulfilling prophecies that you see the gap in ability widen significantly year after year after year. By the 10th year of this widening, you see huge differences when they didn't start off that way.
A lot of schools struggle to provide children with even the most basic of educations. Do you think this is part of the test and assess culture that we have built into our schools?
Absolutely. This is a culture. I really do think we need to change the culture from the bottom up, which is why I'm arguing for a fundamental shift in our level of analysis, from individual differences comparing people to each other and standardized metrics to a personal level.
Well, what happens in other countries? Many countries that do very well educationally.
Finland.
But many countries wind up with rote systems. Is that a better way of teaching people?
No, I think that's even a worse way. Look, I think that there are countries that do worse than us. I'm not saying America's like the worst in the world. And also there's huge variability as well. I'm an advocate. I ran the book. I'm an advocate for like Montessori programs. I'm an advocate for lots of other kinds of progressive programs. The thing is, why do we call those alternative education? That's what I'm saying. It doesn't make any sense to me. That should be what we should be doing.
So if we had public education adopt Montessori methods, that would be a good idea?
Not necessarily Montessori, but there's a key, because Montessori methods within themselves, there's lots of different variability in terms of how they implement it. But there's a clear set of conditions they outline in this book. There's rules of engagement that we can do if we design schools taking the latest psychological and developmental research into account on what actually motivates students, the importance of, like, talk about hope, passion, some key skills that we're not even teaching, like critical thinking, self-regulation, things like that. We could be doing a lot better.
My guest is Scott Barry Kaufman. His latest book on gifted intelligence redefined, The Truth About Talent, Practice, Creativity, and the Many Paths to Greatness. It is published by Basic Books. This is WNYC, WNYC.org. I'm Leonard Lopate. It seems to me that our culture often associates intelligence with speed and efficiency, that so many tests are really have time limits, and so you have to write this brilliant essay within a certain amount of time. You might be a slow writer, but a brilliant thinker.
So the global IQ score actually does a really good job of measuring that capacity. It's measuring something. I'm not saying that IQ doesn't measure anything. But then we wonder, why is it so strongly correlated with all these other things that are measured in the same way in a single slice of time in a timed situation? And then when you really think about it, it should be a no-brainer why all these things are so strongly correlated with each other.
So should tests not have time limits?
I think it depends on the purpose, what you're trying to measure for. Let's say you're trying to enter a particular profession where you have to think on your feet, and this sort of what's called fluid reasoning is very important. Then I do think that it's important I think it's important more generally to match the skills with what you're selecting for. But we're not even doing that. What we're doing is we're taking one skill, we're measuring everyone to that one metric.
Well, does the newer concept of intelligence mean that we should start guiding children towards specific studies at an earlier age, or exactly the opposite, that we should allow children the freedom to explore their interests and find their intelligence?
Well, you hit the nail on the head with the latter. We should take kids' dreams seriously. This is something, it sounds very, I don't know if it sounds corny to say take kids' dreams seriously, but there's science showing that if you actually do that, people get closer to actually realizing those dreams.
Well, wouldn't that lead to some chaos in the classroom? One kid It wants to draw all the time. The next kid loves to solve math problems.
No, I mean, there's experiments in progress right now of people doing this, and it's not leading to chaos. I work with this group here in New York called the Future Project, where they take everyone's kid seriously. They don't measure their IQ to limit that, and these kids are doing extraordinary projects that completely blow my mind.
Where would this begin? In the ed classes that teachers take?
I think that it should start at the teacher training level. I think a lot of teachers aren't thought or taught about the latest developmental psychology research and the latest about the conditions that are conducive to flourishing. I think that would be wonderful if we started at that level.
Then you would wind up with classes that would probably have even more discipline problems than they do right now. Most teachers will tell you that when they start teaching, the biggest problem is keeping the kids quiet.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that there's still going to be huge variation in individual differences in how people respond in such a structured environment. But imagine a new world. Imagine a world in which there isn't these walls built around the students.
Well, you mentioned Finland. Finland has I can't think of too many brilliant people who have come out of Finland recently, and Nokia is not doing as well as Samsung or Apple.
But their academic achievement scores are good. Their standardized test scores are they all go to college.
And to what end?
Okay, so that you raise a larger point. And what should be?
I don't want to pick on Finland.
I know, me neither. Me neither. I love Finnish people.
Some of my best friends are Finns.
Yeah, I love Finnish people. But I think you raise a larger point, which is very important. We talk about what is the end. If the end is creative achievement, then we're going about everything completely wrong. We need to do a complete topsy-turvy of our education system if we actually want to encourage people to creatively transform a field.
Well, I remember years ago there was a school called Summerhill, O'Neill Summerhill, and he was encouraging kids to find their special potential. And one day I wrote a college paper on Summerhill, and it turns out that nobody of real note graduated from Summerhill. So what did that mean ultimately? Does it really matter what kind of education you have if you've got that special thing?
No, I don't, and I also don't think it matters how fast you learn the material.
Well, your story really depended on some teachers who saw something special in you. So can teachers inspire kids even if the system can't?
I think what they saw is that I was frustrated and I was ready for more engagement and intellectual. And teachers should be on high alert at every moment that a student is ready for something. If I had my way, I would reconceptualize potential as merely readiness for engagement. Nothing more, nothing less.
As a society, do we have too narrow a definition of genius? Words like genius?
Oh, gosh, yes. Every day I see a new article of some child who's maybe 5 or 6 and can talk like they're 7 or 8, and then we say that child's a genius. What that does indicate is that child is intellectually different, may have needs in terms of acceleration and things of that nature. That child is not a genius. We have no idea if that child's going to be a genius, and we have no idea all the other kids who are slower if they will be geniuses.
Well, Einstein was slow,
he was slow.
In school.
Yeah. And he wouldn't have made these headlines on Huffington Post. Or every day I see a new headline saying, genius 5-year-old can, do something that most 5-year-olds can. And
Well, we know that Mozart was quite brilliant at an early age. Was Beethoven?
I don't know much about Beethoven, but Mozart, if I may go to that example, that's a fascinating example because he was clearly a prodigy. But I've studied prodigies, and the thing you see with prodigies, they don't necessarily have high IQs. In fact, it seems to be unrelated to this IQ score. It's a very specific passion and proclivity to master a domain, and that's what I argue is that's what talent is at the end of the day. Talent is not something fully inborn. It's just a passion and proclivity to master particular rules of a domain. And it's partly in the genes, and a heck of a lot of it can be influenced by environment.
If you had the opportunity to redo your entire education,
oh boy.
Do you feel that the one that you had has made you a better, more educated person in the end?
I do. I actually do. Like I said, in some cosmic sort of way, I thank God. I thank everyone for contributing to this, allowing me to want to fight to prove. I feel like every step of the way I had to fight to show people that I was intellectually capable, and I'm tired of fighting. And thankfully now I don't have to take SATs anymore, any more standardized tests.
Well, you do have to get the approval of your students as a teacher, don't you?
That's true, and you can ask my students if I'm doing that, but I think I'm doing an okay job there.
And this is your second book?
No, this is my first single-authored book.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've done academic volumes and I've co-authored books, but yeah.
And where do you think that your work is going to lead you? Do you think that...
I'm open to the journey. I really don't know.
But do you think that we'll ever really understand the nature of intelligence?
I don't think that should be our aim. I think it should be our aim to understand the unique brand of intelligence that every human being on this planet can offer.
Scott Barry Kaufman, his book, Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined, The Truth About Talent, Practice, Creativity, and the Many Paths to Greatness. It is published by Basic Books, and I want to thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you so much.
Up next, South African comedian Trevor Noah talks about his new one-man off-Broadway show called Born a Crime, about growing up in apartheid South Africa as a mixed-race child. In our second hour, Peter Neufeld of the Innocence Project talks about the Supreme Court's ruling earlier this week on collecting DNA samples, and we will get the latest on the Bradley Manning trial. This is WNYC, WNYC.org. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter.
WNYC is supported by Lincoln Motor Company, a supporter of August Wilson's American Century Cycle at the Jerome L. Green Performance Space in New York. More info about Lincoln Motor Company is available at lincoln.com. The Brooklyn Museum, presenting John Singer Sargent watercolors, an exhibition of early 20th century watercolor landscapes, portraits, and more by the American artist, on view through July 28th. More at brooklynmuseum.org. WNYC is a media partner of Brooklyn Arts Council's Harbor Lore Festival, exploring the symbolism of water and the artistic traditions of the borough's diverse immigrant communities through dance, music, and storytelling. Now to June 15th. Details at brooklynartscouncil.org.
And now, another WNYC sustaining member haiku, as read by Jad Abumrad.
Each morning I rise, calmed and informed by the voice of Satirius. Jordan Schaefer, New York, New York.
Become a sustaining member today. Go to WNYC.org and click on support or call 1-888-376-WNYC.
WNYC is supported by the Roundabout Theater Company, presenting the premiere of The Unavoidable Disappearance of Tom Dernan at